If you've ever been handed something that looked like nothing and discovered it was everything, then this story is for you. Stay with us, because what happened to this woman in a small Nova Scotia town is the kind of thing you won't stop thinking about for a long time. And if stories like this one move you, hit subscribe before we get started. We put out new ones every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming. Vera Dumont was 54 years old the morning she signed the divorce papers, and she did it with a pen that wasn't even hers. She'd borrowed it from the paralegal at the front desk, a young woman who smelled like vanilla and hadn't looked up from her phone. Vera had signed her name on 4 separate pages, handed the pen back, and walked out into the gray November morning on Barrington Street in Halifax without saying a word to anyone. Not to her lawyer, not to her husband, not to the woman with the vanilla perfume. She sat in her car for 11 minutes before she started the engine. She knew it was 11 minutes because she watched the clock on the dashboard. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even sure what she was doing. She was just sitting there, watching the seconds change, wondering when exactly a life could come apart so quietly that you almost didn't hear it go. 23 years. That was what she'd put in. 23 years of dinners and drives to Shuttered and weekend trips to Lunenburg that Glenn had always insisted on planning but never actually enjoyed once they arrived. 23 years of believing that the quiet between them was the comfortable kind. She found out in April that it wasn't. She doesn't talk about what she found, and we won't ask her to. What we'll tell you is this. By the time November came, Vera had moved into a rented room above a bakery on Gottingen Street. Her savings were down to $4,000, and everything she owned fit into 11 boxes and a green vinyl duffel bag she'd had since university. Her daughter Renee had offered to let her stay in the spare room in Dartmouth. Vera had said no 3 times before she finally accepted that she had no other choice. It was the hardest thing she'd done in years. Harder than signing those papers even. Harder than watching Glenn pack his good shirts into a garment bag and carry them to his car without looking back, accepting help from her own daughter. Vera had always been the one doing the helping. She wasn't sure she knew how to be on the other side of it. She spent most of December in that spare room, pretending to look for work on her laptop, while actually staring at the same 3 job listings for hours without reading them. Renee brought her tea and didn't ask questions, which was the most generous thing anyone had ever done for Vera, though she couldn't have said so at the time. The call came on the 28th of December, between Christmas and New Year's, during that strange week when time seems to stop and the year hasn't figured out what it is yet. It was a woman named Sandra, calling from a law office in Antigonish. She had a calm, measured voice and she pronounced Vera's name correctly on the first try, which was unusual enough that Vera sat up straighter on the edge of the bed. "Your uncle," Sandra said. "Fernand Dumont. I'm sorry to tell you, he passed away on the 22nd. Vera had not spoken to her Uncle Fernand in 14 years. She had thought of him, though, more than she would have admitted. He was her father's youngest brother, the one the family called eccentric, which was the word they used when they meant something they didn't have the patience to understand. He'd moved out of the family house in Shuttered when Vera was still in elementary school and eventually settled in a small inland town called Bayside Junction, about 40 minutes from Antigonish, where he'd bought a piece of land along a county road and built something on it that nobody in the family had ever visited. "He left something to you," Sandra said. "In the will." Vera's first thought, and she isn't proud of this, was that she hoped it was money. $4,000 was not going to last long, and she was too old to start from nothing, or at least she felt too old, which might be the same thing. "He's left you the property," Sandra said. "The land and the building on it." "What building?" Vera asked. There was a brief pause on the other end. "He operated a small motor lodge. 8 units. He called it the Cedar Line." Vera didn't say anything for a moment. She was processing the word motor lodge and running it against everything she knew about her uncle, which wasn't much. "And the building is," she started. "It's been closed for about 3 years," Sandra said carefully. "Mr. Dumont's health made it difficult to continue operating." Vera thanked her, wrote down the address and sat very still with the notepad on her lap for a long time after the call ended. Renee, when she heard, said, "Well, that's something," Vera said. "I don't know what that is." She drove out to Bayside Junction on the 3rd of January alone, because she needed to see it without anyone watching her face when she did. The county road was the kind that narrows as you go, the trees coming in closer on both sides until the sky becomes a thin strip of pale gray above you. Vera had the GPS on, but she almost missed the turn anyway. There was no sign at the road, just a gap in the tree line and 2 ruts in the frozen ground, leading down a slight grade toward a gravel lot. The cedar line sat at the back of the lot, 8 low units in a row, connected under a single sloped roof, the kind of place that had been built in the 60s and hadn't been updated since. The paint, a faded blue that might once have been cheerful, was peeling in long strips from the clapboard. The eaves were sagging on the east end. 3 of the windows had plastic sheeting over them instead of glass. There was a small office at the far left of the building, a separate structure connected by a covered walkway. Vera walked to it first. The door was unlocked. Inside there was a counter, a row of hooks on the wall behind it. 7 of them, each with a numbered tag, and a wood stove in the corner that still had ash in it. She stood in the middle of that office for a long time, looking at those 7 hooks. Because there were 8 units, 7 hooks, and on the second hook from the left, where the number 2 tag should have been, there was nothing. No key, no tag, no hook at all, just a small square hole in the wood where something had been removed. She noticed it immediately and then told herself it meant nothing. She went and looked at the units. 5 of them were basically intact. Musty, cold, in need of work, but structurally sound. 2 had water damage along the back wall. The 8th unit, at the far right end of the building, was locked. Not just closed, locked with a padlock that was newer than anything else on the property. The kind of heavy brass lock that meant someone had put it there on purpose, and not so long ago. There was no key for it on any of the hooks. She hadn't expected there to be. Vera took 47 photographs on her phone and drove back to Dartmouth in the dark. She would like to tell you that she had a clear plan after that. She didn't. What she had was $4,000, a property assessment she didn't understand, and a recurring thought about that locked door that she couldn't seem to put down. She hired a local contractor named Pete, who drove out from Antigonish in a truck with a cracked windshield and gave her an estimate that was more than she had in her account. He was matter-of-fact about it, not unkind. He told her the bones were good. He told her the roof had maybe 2 more winters in it. He told her the electrical would need to be brought up to code before she could put anyone in those units. "Your uncle was a particular man," Pete said, standing in the gravel lot with his coffee, looking at the building the way contractors look at things. Not critically, just honestly. Kept to himself. But he kept things clean. You could see he took care of it before he got too sick. "Did you know him?" Vera asked. "Seen him around. He used to come into the hardware store on the highway." Pete paused. Never said much. But he always paid cash and he always said thank you. That's more than some. After Pete left, Vera sat on the front step of the office with the cold coming up through her jeans and looked at her phone. She had a voicemail from Glenn's lawyer that she hadn't listened to. She deleted it without playing it. She was still looking at the locked unit at the end of the row. It took her 3 weeks to find the key. It wasn't hidden dramatically. No false bottom in a drawer, no letter taped behind a picture frame. It was in a small wooden box in the top shelf of the office closet, inside a tobacco tin, inside a cloth pouch. 3 layers. Fernand had wrapped it carefully, like something that needed protection rather than concealment. It was an ordinary key. Brass, a little worn, with a piece of white tape around the bow and 2 letters, written on it in her uncle's handwriting. Number 2. Vera stood in that closet holding the key for a long time. Then she went and opened the door. "Now before we tell you what she found, we want to ask you something. Have you ever discovered something that completely changed the way you understood a person you thought you knew? We'd really love to hear your story in the comments. And if this is your first time here on Epic Stories, please subscribe. We share stories just like this one every single week, and the community we've built here is something really special." Unit 2 looked, at first, like it had been converted into a storage space. There was a metal shelving unit against the far wall, a folding table, an old wooden chair. But the shelves weren't holding the things you'd expect. Old towels, spare light bulbs, cleaning supplies. They were holding binders. 31 of them, dark green, each one labeled with a year in black marker tape going back to 1991. Vera sat down in the wooden chair and opened the one from 1991 first. It was a ledger. Not a financial ledger. She'd expected that, a record of payments and expenses. This was something different. Each page had a date, a brief description, and a set of initials, sometimes a note in the margin. March 14, woman traveling alone with 2 children. Car trouble on the 104. Unit 6 2 nights, asked for nothing. Left a note under the door saying thank you. June 3. Man older coming back from a funeral in Mabu. Sat on the step for an hour, offered coffee, he talked. Unit 4 one night, no charge. August 19. Young couple, first trip together, clearly nervous. Unit 1, full rate. Left flowers from the roadside on the checkout counter. Vera turned the pages slowly. The entries went on like that, page after page, year after year. Some were a single line, some were a paragraph. Some had small items tucked beside them. A gas receipt someone had left behind, a child's drawing in crayon, a postcard from somewhere out west that just said, "Made it. Thank you." The financial records were there too, but woven in rather than separate, and what became clear as Vera read was that her uncle had operated the Cedar line on a principle that he'd never explained to anyone in the family, maybe never explained out loud to anyone at all. Unit 2 was always kept empty. Not vacant, empty, ready. Cleaned after every seasonal close, aired out in spring. Kept warm enough in winter that the pipes wouldn't freeze. For 31 years, no one had paid to stay in Unit 2. But according to the ledger, 47 different people or families had slept there. The notes beside those entries were different from the others. Shorter, usually. Sometimes just initials and a date, but a few had a word or two added. Running no place else. Didn't ask. Vera read for most of that afternoon. She didn't stop when the lights started going. She turned on the overhead fluorescent and kept reading. At some point she started crying, not dramatically, just the quiet kind of crying that comes when you understand something you can't undo. When you realize that a person you dismissed, a person your whole family wrote off as odd and distant, had been doing something remarkable for 30 years without telling a single soul. Her uncle Fernand, who had not come to her wedding, who had sent Christmas cards that said only best wishes and signed his name in full like you'd sign a check, who her mother had described, not unkindly but with a kind of finality, as someone who'd chosen not to engage with the world. He hadn't chosen not to engage, he'd chosen how to engage, and he'd chosen quietly, in a way that kept the people he helped from ever owing him anything. The last entry in the 2021 binder, the last full year before his health declined enough to close the Cedar line, was dated November 30th. It read, "A woman and her teenage son." She was trying not to let him see she was scared. Unit 2 2 nights. I made them eggs in the morning. She asked me why I kept this room. I told her somebody always needs a room that's just there. She understood. Vera closed the binder and set it on her lap and sat in the wooden chair in Unit 2 for a very long time. She called Pete the next morning. She told him she wanted to talk about what it would take to get the Cedar line operational. He said that depended on what operational meant. She said she wanted 4 of the units ready for guests by June. He said that was doable if they started soon. She said she had $4,000 and a credit she hadn't touched on a line she'd opened years ago and never used. He was quiet for a moment. "That's not a lot," he said. "I know, she said. "You want to stay local on the labor? I can bring in my brother-in-law for the electrical, he owes me a favor. Might cut things down some." "Yes," she said. "Please." She also called Renee that night and told her what she'd found. Renee didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "Mom, can I come and see?" They drove out together the following Saturday. Vera watched her daughter stand in Unit 2 and read the binder from 1991. Watched her turn pages slowly the way Vera had, watched her press her lips together and look at the ceiling the way she did when she was trying not to cry. "He never told anyone?" Renee said finally. "Not that I can find," Vera said. Renee set the binder down carefully. "What are you going to do with this room?" Vera had thought about that since the moment she'd read that last entry. She'd thought about it driving back to Dartmouth and in the spare bedroom at night, and during the long weeks of paperwork and property assessment, and conversations with Sandra at the law office. She'd thought about it every time she looked at the ledger and then looked at that new brass padlock sitting on the folding table because she'd taken it off the door the day Chad found the key and she hadn't put it back on. "I'm going to keep it the way he had it," she said. "Unit 2 stays empty." Renee looked at her for a moment. "You sure?" "He was sure for 31 years, Vera said. "I think he was right." The Cedar line opened on the 7th of June. 4 units, freshly painted, a color Vera had chosen herself, a warm cream that caught the afternoon light better than the old blue had. Pete's brother-in-law had sorted the electrical and fixed a persistent problem with the water pressure in Units 5 and 6. Renee had driven out 2 weekends in a row and helped Vera hang curtains and lay down new floor mats and figure out the Wi-Fi. It wasn't grand. The sign at the road was hand-painted, Vera's own work, and the letters weren't perfectly even. The website was simple, and the listing on the booking platform had exactly 4 photographs and a short description that Vera had written and rewritten 8 times before she accepted it was done. She described the Cedar Line as a quiet place on a county road, good for people who needed to stop. She didn't elaborate. She thought the people who would understand what that meant would find it, and the people who needed a pool and a breakfast buffet would go somewhere else, and that was fine. The first guests arrived on June 9th, a retired couple from New Brunswick on a slow drive to Cape Breton, no particular schedule. They stayed 2 nights, left a thank you note under the office door, and gave the Cedar Line a 5-star review that described it as the kind of place you didn't know you were looking for. By August, all 4 units were booked most weekends. In September, a woman arrived on a Tuesday afternoon without a reservation. She was traveling alone, and she had a look that Vera recognized without being able to name it. A look that meant I have been holding something very heavy for a very long time. Vera gave her a unit without asking questions and brought her a cup of tea an hour later and left it outside the door without knocking. In the morning, the woman came by the office before she left and said, "Thank you. I didn't know I needed somewhere to just stop." Vera said, "There's always a room here for that. It wasn't Unit 2. That one stayed closed, stayed clean, stayed ready in the way Fernand had kept it. But that fall, Vera started keeping her own ledger, not to copy her uncle's, not to preserve his legacy exactly as he'd left it, just to continue a conversation he'd been having with the world for 3 decades, one quiet act at a time, in a language that didn't require anyone to say thank you. She wrote the first entry on an October evening when the maples had gone orange along the county road, and the sky was the particular shade of blue that only happens in Nova Scotia in the last warm week before the cold really settles in. October 14, she wrote. Woman traveling alone. She didn't say where from or where to. Unit 3 one night. Tea at the door. She said she needed somewhere to stop. I understood that. She paused and then she wrote one more line. The same way her uncle must have paused, must have looked at the page and decided what was worth saying. I think Fernand would have liked her. We come back to this story sometimes, when things feel too loud and too fast, and it's hard to remember that quiet people are doing quiet things all the time, in places you've never heard of, on roads you've never driven down. Vera Dumont didn't set out to inherit a legacy. She set out to survive a year that had already taken more than its fair share from her. What she found instead was a man she'd never really known, and a room that had always been open, and a way of moving through the world that didn't ask for anything back. We think about that last entry her uncle wrote, the woman who asked him why he kept the room, and his answer, somebody always needs a room that's just there. Do you know someone like Fernand? Someone whose kindness you only understood later, when you weren't looking for it anymore? Leave your story in the comments. We read every single one. And you'd be surprised how much it means to this community to hear from you. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who might need it today. And if you haven't subscribed to Epic Stories yet, now is a good time. We'll be here next week with something new. Until then, keep a light on.